As Jabez grew, the shadow of his name followed him everywhere. The children in the village teased him, calling him the boy of pain. At first, Jabez didn't understand why his name carried such a burden, but as he got older, the whispers and mocking glances became harder to ignore. The sun rose slowly over the hills of ancient Israel, casting soft light over a quiet village. The air was still, and the village was waking up to another day of toil. In a small house on the edge of the settlement, a young woman named Mabel sat alone. Mabel is the mother of Jabez. Her hands trembled as she cradled her newborn son. Her face, lined with exhaustion, carried a deep sadness. Mabel had been through a difficult labor. The pain she endured seemed endless, and when her son was finally born, the joy she had hoped for didn't come. Instead, her heart felt heavy. She named the baby Jabez, which means sorrow or pain, because his birth had been so hard on her. As Mabel looked down at the tiny boy in her arms, tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't the baby's fault, but she couldn't shake the feeling of despair that surrounded her. Her husband had passed away months before, leaving her to fend for herself. Life was already hard enough, and now she had a child to raise on her own. She wondered how she would manage.
"Why, God,"
she whispered, her voice barely audible.
"why did you let it happen this way?"
The baby stirred, his tiny fists waving in the air. Mabel wiped her tears and gently rocked him. She didn't have answers, but she knew she had to be strong for him. Despite her sorrow, there was something in the baby's eyes, a quietness, a calmness that gave her pause. She held him close and prayed for strength. As Jabez grew, the shadow of his name followed him everywhere. The children in the village teased him, calling him the boy of pain. At first, Jabez didn't understand why his name carried such a burden, but as he got older, the whispers and mocking glances became harder to ignore.
"Why did you name me Jabez?"
he asked his mother one evening as they sat by a small fire. He was about 14 years old, his big brown eyes filled with questions. Mabel hesitated, her hands busy mending a torn piece of cloth. She looked at her son, whose face was earnest and full of innocence. Finally, she sighed and set the cloth aside.
"You were born during a very hard time, my son,"
she said, her voice soft but steady.
"I was scared and I was hurting. When I named you, it was a way to express the hard time I was going through. But it doesn't mean that is who you are."
Jabez nodded slowly, but her words didn't fully ease the weight he carried. He often stayed by himself, avoiding the other children who made fun of him. Instead of playing, he would wander into the fields watching the shepherds tend their flocks or listening to the elders talk about the God of Israel. One day, while sitting under an old olive tree, Jabez overheard a group of men discussing a story from the scriptures. They spoke about how God had led the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. One of the men said,
"Our God is faithful. He doesn't leave us in our suffering. He turns mourning into joy."
Those words struck a chord in Jabez's young heart. Could it be true? Could God change pain into something better? He didn't know, but for the first time he felt a spark of hope. That evening when he got home, he asked his mother to tell him more about God. Mabel was surprised but happy to see her son's interest. She told him stories about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. She explained how God had been with them even in their hardest moments. Jabez listened intently, sing up every word.
"If God helped them,"
Jabez said.
"do you think he can help us too?"
Mabel smiled, her eyes filled with a mix of pride and sadness.
"Yes, my son. God is always near, even when we can't see him."
Time passed and Jabez had grown to become a young man, and he took his life in his hands. From that day on, Jabez started praying. At first his prayers were simple, short and unsure, but as time passed, they became deeper. He prayed for his mother, for their small home, and even for the children who teased him.
"God of Israel,"
he whispered one night, staring at the stars.
"I don't want to live a life of pain. Please help me. Show me that you are there."
As the years went by, Jabez grew into a thoughtful and kind man. He still carried the name that meant pain, but something about him was different. He didn't let the teasing of others break him. Instead, he worked hard, helping his mother with chores and spending time learning from the elders whenever he could. One evening, after a long day of gathering firewood, Jabez sat outside with his mother. The sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink as the sun set behind the hills. "Mother," he said, his voice steady, "I believe God has a plan for me. I don't know what it is, but I don't think my name will hold me back." Mabel looked at her son, now a young man with a strong spirit. Her heart swelled with pride. "You're right, Jabez," she said. "Your name doesn't define you. God does." Though life was still hard, something had shifted in their home. Jabez's faith had brought a new sense of hope, one that Mabel hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. There was a quiet belief that things could change. Jabez lay down that night, the cool breeze brushing his face. His heart was still burdened by many questions, but he had started to believe that the God of Israel could hear him, and for the first time he whispered, "Thank you." The days in the village moved slowly, marked by the rhythm of work and prayer. For Jabez, life was still filled with challenges, but something within him had changed. He spent more time in quiet reflection, often sitting under the old olive tree where he had first felt a pull toward God. It became his secret place, a spot where he could think, pray, and dream. Jabez had grown into a young man now, tall and lean from the hard work he did every day to help his mother. The fields surrounding the village were dry and rugged, and the work of gathering wood, fetching water, and tending small crops was exhausting. Yet Jabez carried himself with quiet determination. His hands were rough from labor, but his heart was soft. He often found himself speaking to God in those moments of silence, asking for strength and guidance. One evening, after a long day, Jabez returned home to find his mother sitting on their mat, weaving a basket. He dropped the bundle of firewood he was carrying and sat down beside her. "Mother," he said, wiping the sweat from his brow, "why do some people seem to have so much, while others like us struggle so much?" Mabel looked up from her work and smiled gently.
Jabez, life isn't about how much we have, but it is about how we live. Those who trust in God and follow His ways will find true peace, no matter what they have or don't have.
Let me pause it there. I think there is a little problem there. She may be right, but not completely right. The same Bible says, "Occupy till I come." Also, Jesus became poor so that we might become rich. I think we should accept the positive side of life rather than getting comfortable with the norm. But little did Jabez know that his name was the cause of his penury and poverty. Do not forget, in the book of Genesis 35:10, God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and that was for a purpose. And it reads, God said to him, "Your name is Jacob, but you will no longer be called Jacob. Your name will be Israel." So he named him Israel. Jabez thought about her words as he lay on his mat that night. He wanted to believe them, but the struggles of daily life made it hard. Still, he had seen the stories of faithfulness in the scriptures. He remembered Joseph, who had been sold into slavery by his brothers and falsely accused, yet rose to greatness because he trusted in God. He wondered if God could do something like that for him. The next day, Jabez went to the village elders. These were the wise men of the community, known for their knowledge of God's law and the stories passed down through generations. Jabez was eager to learn more about God, even though he wasn't sure if the elders would welcome someone like him, a young man with a name that meant pain. As he approached the group, he hesitated, his nerves getting the better of him. One of the elders, a man named Eliab, noticed him lingering and waved him over. "Come, young one," Eliab said. "What brings you here?" Jabez swallowed his fear and stepped closer. "I want to know more about God," he said. "I want to understand His ways and how to live a life that pleases Him." The elders exchanged glances, surprised by the sincerity in the boy's voice. Eliab motioned for him to sit. "God's ways are not always easy to understand," Eliab said, "but He reveals Himself to those who seek Him with all their heart. Tell me, Jabez, what do you already know?" Jabez shared what his mother had taught him and the stories he had overheard. Eliab listened patiently, then began to teach Jabez about God's laws and promises. He spoke of the covenant God made with Abraham and how he delivered Israel from Egypt. He explained the importance of obedience, humility, and faith. Jabez set up every word, asking questions and writing notes on a scrap of parchment he had found. He began to visit the elders regularly, learning everything he could. It became clear to the elders that this boy was different. Despite the hardships in his life, his desire to know God was genuine and unwavering. One day, as Jabez walked home from the synagogue where he had just had a teaching from Eliab, he noticed a group of boys from the village playing by the well. They saw him and began to jeer.
"There goes Jabez, the boy of sorrow,"
one of them shouted.
Hey, Jabez, are you going to cry to your God about your pain again?
Another teased. Jabez stopped in his tracks. The mocking words stung, but instead of responding in anger, he took a deep breath and kept walking. He had learned enough to know that people's words didn't define him. As he walked away, he silently prayed, "God, give me the strength to rise above this. Help me to see myself the way you see me." By the time he reached home, Jabez's heart had settled. He told his mother about what had happened, and she listened carefully, her face thoughtful. "Jabez," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "people will always have opinions, but what matters is who you choose to be. You're not just pain. You're more than your name. You're a child of the living God." Her words stayed with him, and from that day forward, Jabez made a choice. He wouldn't let his name or his circumstances hold him back. Instead, he would seek God with all his heart, trusting that God could turn even a life of sorrow into something meaningful. Jabez's prayers became more focused. He prayed not just for strength, but also for wisdom. He asked God to guide him and show him what kind of man he should become. Slowly, he began to notice changes in himself. He was still the same boy, living in the same small house and doing the same hard work. But there was a new determination in his heart. He started to see his challenges as opportunities to grow closer to God. One evening, as he prayed under the olive tree, he spoke words that felt bigger than himself.
"God of Israel,"
he said,
"I don't want my life to be small. I want to live for something greater than this pain. Show me how to honor you, even in my struggles."
The air around him seemed still, as if the world were listening. Jabez felt a peace he hadn't known before. It wasn't that his problems disappeared, but his heart was no longer weighed down by them. He was learning to see beyond the pain, trusting that God was working in ways he couldn't yet understand. Over time, Jabez became known in the village not as the young man of sorrow, but as the boy with wisdom beyond his years. People began to seek him out, asking for his advice and learning from his example. He didn't see himself as special, but others saw something in him, a quiet strength, a deep faith. One day, Eliab the elder approached Jabez as he was gathering firewood. "You've grown into a fine young man," Eliab said. "It's clear that God's hand is on your life." Jabez smiled, feeling both humbled and encouraged. He still didn't know what God had in store for him, but he was ready to keep walking in faith, one step at a time. And so, Jabez continued his journey, not defined by his name or his past, but by the God he trusted with his future. Jabez stood on the edge of the field, looking out at the dry, uneven land that stretched before him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He had finished his chores for the day and now sought the quiet of his favorite place, the old tree. He walked toward it, his steps slow and deliberate, his thoughts heavy. Life was hard. Though he had grown stronger in his faith and learned to trust in God, the challenges of daily life never seemed to ease. His mother was aging, her hands now too weak to do the work she once did. The little they had was barely enough, and the weight of responsibility on Jabez's shoulders often felt overwhelming. As he reached the tree, Jabez sank to the ground and leaned against its rough trunk. He closed his eyes and spoke softly. "God of Israel," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I've learned to trust you, and I know you are good, but I can't do this alone. I need you." He paused, gathering his thoughts. Over the years, Jabez had often prayed for strength and wisdom, but tonight was different. Tonight he felt a stirring deep in his heart, a boldness he couldn't explain. "Lord," he said, lifting his eyes to the heavens.
Oh, that you would bless me indeed and enlarge my territory. Let your hand be with me and keep me from harm, so that I will be free from pain.
The words flowed out of him, simple yet powerful. He wasn't asking for riches or an easy life. He was asking for God's blessing, whatever that might look like, and for the strength to live the life he believed God had for him. Jabez wanted more, not for his own gain, but to do something greater with the life he'd been given. As he finished praying, a sense of peace washed over him. The air around him seemed still, as if the world were listening. Jabez opened his eyes and looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't know how or when, but he believed that God had heard him. The days that followed were much the same: hard work, simple meals, and quiet evenings with his mother. Yet something inside Jabez had shifted. His prayer had given him a renewed sense of purpose. He carried himself differently, with quiet confidence and a deep trust in the God he had called upon. Though life hadn't yet changed outwardly, Jabez knew in his heart that something was happening. And so he continued to work, to pray, and to wait, trusting that the God who had heard his prayer would answer in his time. Sometimes when we pray and do not see instant result, we feel God has abandoned us, not knowing that in the realms of the Spirit there a lot has changed. The seasons changed, and with them so did Jabez's life. Though he couldn't pinpoint when or how it happened, the weight he had carried for so long began to lift. Opportunities started to come his way. Unexpected and unexplainable moments where doors seemed to open that had always been closed. Jabez was looking more handsome and younger than ever. One day, a man from a neighboring village approached Jabez while he was working in the fields. "I've heard about you," the man said, his voice steady but kind. "They say you are honest and wise, someone who can be trusted. I need help managing my land and livestock, and I think you're the right person for the job." Jabez was surprised but grateful. He accepted the offer, and over time, his hard work and faithfulness brought success to the man's fields. As Jabez managed the land with care and diligence, he found himself gaining the respect of others in the community. People began seeking his advice, trusting his judgment not only in work, but in matters of life and faith. Despite his growing influence, Jabez remained humble. He often spent his evenings in prayer under the olive tree, thanking God for the opportunities and asking for wisdom to handle them well. He understood that his blessings were not for his own glory, but for a greater purpose. One evening, as he sat outside his home, his mother joined him, carrying a small bowl of stew. "You've grown into a fine man, Jabez," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "I always knew God had a plan for you, even when I couldn't see it." Jabez smiled, his heart full. "It's not me, Mother, it's God. He's been with us all along." Word of Jabez's integrity and wisdom spread beyond the village. Merchants and landowners began seeking his help, offering him more responsibility and resources. Jabez could have used these blessings to live a life of ease, but he didn't. Instead, he shared what he had with others, ensuring that the poor and the widows were cared for. One day, a young boy approached Jabez in the market. The boy looked nervous, clutching a small basket of dates. "Are you the man who helps people?" the boy asked timidly. Jabez knelt to meet the boy's eyes. "I try to be. What do you need, young one?" The boy explained that his family's well had dried up and they had no water for their crops. Jabez didn't hesitate. He organized a group of workers to dig a new well for the family. When it was finished, the boy's father came to thank Jabez. "You didn't have to help us," the man said, his voice choked with emotion. "But you did. Why?" Jabez smiled gently. "Because God has been good to me. It's only right that I share that goodness with others." Though life remained filled with challenges, Jabez's faith and generosity continued to make a difference. He lived with integrity, knowing that his blessings were not just for himself, but for everyone around him. And in this, he found true purpose. Life had become fruitful for Jabez, but it was not without its difficulties. As his influence grew, so did the attention of those who envied him. Some whispered that Jabez didn't deserve the blessings he received, claiming he must have done something dishonest to gain them. Others tried to sabotage his work, hoping to tarnish his reputation. One afternoon, while Jabez oversaw workers in the fields, a man approached him, his face stern. "Jabez," the man said sharply, "there are rumors spreading that you've been taking more than your share from the harvests. People are starting to question your honesty." The accusation stung. Jabez had worked hard to live with integrity, and hearing such words felt like a blow to his heart. He could feel anger rising, but chose instead to respond calmly. "Let those who doubt me co-worm and see the work for themselves," Jabez said. "I have nothing to hide." The man seemed taken aback by Jabez's composed response. He nodded and walked away, leaving Jabez to return to his work. Though he continued his tasks, the weight of the rumors lingered in his mind. That evening, as he sat under the olive tree, he poured his heart out to God. "Lord, you have blessed me and shown me favor," Jabez prayed. "But now people question my character. Help me to stand firm and let the truth come to light." Days turned into weeks, and the whispers about Jabez grew louder. Still, he remained steady, trusting that God would defend him. He worked harder than ever, showing through his actions the honesty of his heart. Slowly, the rumors began to fade as those who doubted him saw his unwavering commitment to doing what was right. Jabez looked at them, his heart heavy but his faith intact. "We will do all that we can," he said, "and we will trust God for the rest. He has brought us this far, and I believe He won't abandon us now." Together they dug deeper wells and conserved what little water they had. Jabez also shared his resources, ensuring that no family went without food. Though the drought was long and difficult, the people were amazed at how they managed to endure. In time, the rains returned, and the fields began to thrive once again. Through it all, Jabez remained steadfast, trusting God in the face of challenges. His trials only deepened his faith, proving that even in the hardest times, God's hand was with him. Years passed, and Jabez's life became an example for many in his village and beyond. Though he had started life with the burden of his name and humble beginnings, his unwavering faith and integrity had carried him through. His fields were now among the most fertile in the region, and the people who once mocked him now came to him for advice and guidance. One quiet evening, Jabez sat under the olive tree, reflecting on how far he had come. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the cool breeze carried the scent of the nearby fields. He thought about his mother, who had passed on a few years earlier, and how her words of encouragement had shaped him. She had believed in God's plan for him even when life seemed so difficult. Now, Jabez could see the truth in her faith. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. A young boy from the village approached, hesitating before speaking. "Jabez, may I ask you something?" the young man said nervously. "Of course," Jabez replied, motioning for him to sit. The young boy lowered himself onto the ground, his face etched with worry. "I've heard stories about how you started with nothing," he said. "How did you become the man you are now? I feel like I'll never rise above my struggles." Jabez studied the young man, seeing the same uncertainty he had once felt in himself. He rested a hand on the boy's shoulder and spoke gently. "Do you know why I was named Jabez?" he asked. The young man nodded. "Your name means pain." "That's right," Jabez said with a small smile. "But do you know what else it means? It means I understand what it's like to carry a burden. My life didn't change because of my own strength. It changed because I trusted God to help me." Jabez shared the story of the prayer he had prayed under this very tree so many years ago. He told the young man about the struggles he had faced, the doubts he had wrestled with, and the faith that had carried him through. "God doesn't promise an easy life," Jabez continued, "but He promises to be with us. When I prayed for His blessing, I wasn't asking for riches or power. I was asking for His guidance and strength to live the life He wanted for me. And He answered, not all at once, but in ways I could never have imagined." The young boy nodded, his expression thoughtful. "So, you think I should pray like you did?" Jabez smiled. "Pray with all your heart, but more than that, live with integrity. Trust God in everything, even when it's hard. He sees the bigger picture, even when we can't." The young man thanked Jabez and left, his steps lighter than when he had arrived. Jabez watched him go, silently praying for him. He had learned over the years that his blessings were not just for his own benefit, but for the good of others. As night fell, Jabez made his way back home. His house was still simple, though well kept, and his life was filled with the quiet contentment of knowing he had lived faithfully. Before sleeping, he knelt by his bedside and prayed, "Lord, you have been so good to me. You've turned my pain into joy and my struggles into blessings. I ask that you continue to guide me, and may my life always bring honor to you." The next morning, Jabez rose with a sense of peace. He continued his work in the fields, greeted by the laughter of children and the warm smiles of his neighbors. Though his name still meant pain, it no longer defined him. Instead, it was a reminder of God's power to transform even the hardest circumstances into something beautiful. By the time Jabez's story was written down for future generations, it had become a source of hope for those who felt trapped by their circumstances. People read about the boy born in sorrow who became a man of great faith, and they were inspired to seek God with the same boldness. In the end, Jabez's life taught a powerful lesson. Our past does not dictate our future, and when we trust God, even pain can lead to purpose. His story lived on, not just in words, but in the lives of those who found strength in his example and dared to pray with faith like he did. Never lose hope, no matter the challenges you face. Keep praying and trusting in God, for your breakthrough is on the way. Remember, God is real, God is able, and he can transform your current situation. Reflect on the powerful words of Luke 1:37, "For nothing will be impossible with God." Jesus loves you, my friend. Surrender your heart to him and let him guide your path. If this message has touched you, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and share this video. You never know who might need encouragement today. Drop a comment to inspire and uplift someone who may be on the verge of giving up. Thank you, and may God bless you richly.